What's the worst that could happen? Now, yesterday I was listening to an episode of Russell Brunson's Marketing in Your Car podcast, and in one episode he was explaining how a friend of his phoned him up one night. His friend was a chiropractor and his business wasn't doing too well. I think he was on the verge of closing up and he was just totally panicking. He had bills coming in and he hadn't got money to pay for them. So he rang Russell up and asked him what was his advice, what he advised him doing. So Russell went round to him, had a chat, and found out that his friend was paralysed by inaction, in that, because he was facing this huge kind of, problem, he was almost like a rabbit in the headlights. He was just, didn't know which direction to run, didn't know what action to take, and because he was probably looking for something that was going to work 100% out the gate and that was going to be a home run, he was searching probably around for that right action or that right thing he could do so that he wouldn't put his business at risk. And again, he was just totally kind of froze. He didn't know which way to go because he didn't want to make a mistake. He didn't want to do something wrong. So that's why he phoned Russell and explained it all to him. So Russell said to him, well, what's the worst case scenario if your business did fail? And, the friend explained, well, probably if my business fails, I'll probably go bankrupt, I'll probably lose the house, and I'll probably, all these different chain of events will happen. So these were kind of superficial things that he had mentioned, but Russell said, right, let's get a little bit deeper. What would maybe mean in going bankrupt? What would it mean to you? And again, you probably have things like maybe, embarrassment, and maybe, maybe thinking that, you are maybe the black sheep in the family or something like that because you went bankrupt, and, how could you, this kind of social kind of embarrassment. Maybe that was one of the things that came up. So as I dug a little bit deeper and kind of got down into those kind of fears, Russell says, right, okay, if your business fails, that is what's going to happen to you. And when he probably had a look at, what the worst case scenario was, and if everything kind of failed, when he actually looked at that and kind of studied it and took it on, it probably didn't seem as scary then, because he faced up to the fact that no matter what he did, if everything completely failed, if all his actions were 100% bad, this was where the point he was going to be. And sometimes that can be a freeing thing. As Russell said about his friend, that did kind of free him up. It freed his head up mentally. It kind of took the handbrake of his kind of creativity and maybe whatever actions he could take, because he knew if this all falls apart, this is where I'm going to end up. So rather than, doing nothing, let's give it a go and see what we can do. And he turned his business around by, having this kind of notion at the back of his head that if everything didn't work out, this was the situation he was going to be faced with. Now, a lot of writers don't, or maybe have this kind of, maybe their paralysis, like analysis by paralysis, like Russell's friend was, because they're afraid of not making a mistake. They're afraid of writing a book today and it flops. They're afraid of maybe, creating a podcast that no one listens to, or writing to a blog today that nobody is ever going to read that post. And because they're trying to hit home runs on every single time, they are, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of, not writing a great book, not writing a great blog post, not creating a great podcast episode, because they have this kind of fear of failure. And because of that, they're probably not working as hard in their business as they could be because of that. But in the worst case scenario, what's the worst case scenario for a writer maybe who writes a book and it flops? That's it, it flops. You don't lose a life. You're not going to take any years off your health. Yes, it might be a waste of time, those weeks that you have spent writing that book, or again to a blog post that fails today. So what if that blog post fails? It's still content that's on your site. Again, so what if that podcast episode doesn't find any listeners? You have the added experience of doing another episode, which means that, that is something you're always going to have. You're always going to feel more comfortable speaking on camera or speaking on microphone or whatever, but you're going to have that little bit of confidence that nobody can take from you, even though your episode might have failed and maybe nobody ever listens to it. So if you find maybe that you are like Russell's friend, kind of like a rabbit in the headlights, you are trying to do the right thing And because you're trying to do the right thing, you just don't know what to do because you're afraid of taking one step forward in case it's the wrong step, and you just don't know what to do. Maybe you're just frozen in your business. Maybe you're afraid of writing that book because you're afraid it's going to flop, or you're afraid of doing whatever action because you just, you don't want to make any mistakes. And as Russell says, when you do kind of look at the worst case scenario and kind of hold it up and say, right, this is the point where I could be at if everything goes wrong. When you kind of look at that and study it, it does sometimes take, the hold over you, because it's almost getting that kind of thought out of your head, getting it down on paper. Sometimes when you actually get some thoughts out of your head down on paper, sometimes, when you look at them on paper, they lose a hold on you. They don't seem to have as much strength, and sometimes they are a totally ridiculous thought that you're having. So maybe this worst case scenario that you could be kind of putting on a pedestal right now is something that is probably totally ridiculous. And maybe even getting a pen and paper out today and writing out the worst case scenarios of whatever you're doing. If it went wrong, at the end of the day, it might be just a waste of time. You might embarrass yourself. You might lose maybe a couple of days, a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months' work. But at the end of the day, you are still living, breathing, still walking around. That is, in the worst case scenario, no matter what happens, you'll still have those things. And again, you'll still have the experience of, putting in the hours of that writing that can never be taken off you. So you can carry that experience into your next book. So if you are like Russell's friend, just frozen, don't know what to do, have a look at what is the worst case scenario in, if everything went wrong with what you're doing, if you made all the wrong mistakes, if you took all the wrong actions, and if your business just completely failed, whatever happens today. Give that some thought, and as I said, sometimes putting it out there and studying it sometimes just kind of lifts, maybe takes the handbrake off your actions, or maybe frees you up, because you can see, well, this is the worst thing that's going to happen if this all goes wrong. So give that some thought today if you are frozen at the moment. And as always, if you'd like to find more of this great content, do a search for WriteCome, WriteCome. And if you listen to this as a podcast episode, you can hit subscribe, or if you want to leave a review, it's much appreciated. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, click on the bell or whatever the subscription thing is on YouTube, and I will send all the next couple of videos on to you. So as always, have a great day. Thanks for your time. Bye bye.